All right, we are live. Welcome to Question Christianity. So, if you were with us last week, this is a very interactive group. So, we previously met in Mill Mountain, and so we were having our meetings in there until COVID-19. So, we're trying to keep this as live and interactive as possible for people to still participate. So, people are welcome to participate here on the live stream. If you're comfortable coming up, you don't have to have your picture up. You can just bring your voice with you. Send me a private message on Facebook. I'll be glad to send you the link to join us here live if you want to partake in the discussion that way. Also, please feel free to interact through chat. We have interacted through chat a good bit. And can everybody hear me okay? Are there issues with the audio? Is that anybody? Let me try this. Okay, can you hear this okay? Or still kind of choppy, guys? Who knows? Okay. Well, anyway, feel free to interact through chat as well. Sounds like I am not doing so well on the stream right now, so let me see. I'm going to check out some things here and see if I can fix some of these technical difficulties.
Yeah, you
want to make sure everybody hear me okay.
That went better.
Okay, better now. Maybe your mute is messing me up somehow. Who knows? Okay. Well, as long as it's working now, we should be good. So our discussion last week, and we're continuing this week, is going to be on the subject of miracles and objections to the subject of miracles, particularly in the Christian worldview. So that's kind of where our discussion is headed this week. If you weren't able to attend last week, I will do a brief review as we kind of run through what happened then. But again, just want to state this is an interactive group, so please interact in chat. The main link is on the Question Christianity Facebook page. There's a Question Christianity group. Secondary links in there, but there's also a organization Facebook page. That's where the main link is, and if you chat on there, we will be able to see you in the main chat here and be able to interact with things. So if you're not on that link, feel free to go over to that page and check that out, because that will be the main chat we will be interacting with. So we're going to do a brief recap of last week. We're going to run through this super quick since we covered it in great detail last time. Bear with me one second. All right, so last week we kicked off our discussion on the subject of miracles, and before we went too far into this subject, we really wanted to stop and break down some things. So we looked at why people object to miracle claims, and then we really got into some definitional issues. So we spent some time looking at definitions and what kind of problems we run into with those. If I can get my slides to move here. So we looked at what is a miracle, and we looked at definitions for unlikely as well as improbable and impossible. So essentially we looked at really breaking down and defining what words we're using so we can be as specific as possible in this discussion.
As soon as I went off mute, you sound better.
And oh, okay. Well, good. Okay. Yeah, my wife just
be quiet.
said my voice is glitching really, really bad on here as well. Yeah.
Is it even
So
better
I'm
now?
not
I'm
sure
off of
why
mute.
that is. I don't know. Maybe we can hope, right?
You guys are
Does
on
that sound
PC.
okay, guys?
Oh, no, you get a Chromebook and a PC. This is a Mac. Maybe it's because all three of them are saying, "Hey, we don't like each other."
Probably so. It's probably a fight among the computers, no doubt.
I don't know why they can't just
I
code.
sound okay now, or
Yeah, a lot better.
Yeah.
I know, right? Okay, that's weird. I don't know why the mute was throwing it off, but okay, I guess that did it. I guess it was your Mac, Pete, that was throwing the wrench in here. So we've looked at, right before we closed out, we looked at where to draw the line with things. So we kind of broke it down like this in terms of a scale from normal to impossible. Just to give us an idea of looking at miracles, we wanted to be able to quantify it in the best way possible. And then finally, with that, we looked at a comparison as to what the Christian worldview allows as a possibility versus where naturalism may draw the line as to what is possible and what is not. And with naturalism, there are actually some differences because the line could be drawn in a lot of different places. There is no one specific place to draw the line. Before we move on, any thoughts from last week, Charles?
No.
Okay. Well, that was easy.
Yeah.
All right. So finally, we threw up some probabilities in terms of what each area, just a rough probability, so we could kind of look at things with a little more. We got some people who want some camera time here, so yeah. So you can see on the screen, these are kind of the probabilities that I threw up just as a estimate of where I would kind of rate each of these lines. So beyond 1 in 10 to the 45th power to incalculable would be impossible for me, and so on and so forth. And this, again, may be a little different for everybody, but just to give you some idea, and you may consider these measurements for what you would consider unlikely and improbable and impossible a little bit different. But for me, this is kind of where I drew the lines, and particularly that last one, 1 in 10 to the 45th power. That's what mathematically we would consider essentially a zero chance beyond that point. So that was our first start in looking at this chart. Now, tonight we're going to look at that a little differently from a bit of a different perspective here. I can hear myself now.
I can hear yourself too.
That's not good. Okay. So, Christianity, in terms of the explanatory power, it leaves explanatory power for events in all these ranges. However, a Christian can remain skeptical about just about anything in terms of our initial response to a claim. So whether it is a claim that is very unlikely to improbable to impossible, Christians are free to remain skeptical about a large range of events.
So you're saying just because I believe in God doesn't mean I have to believe in every harebrained hypothesis, every poltergeist story?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Do you, as a Christian, do you think that is a fair approach to take? Would you remain skeptical of the same range of things here, Charles? Or
Yeah,
Pete?
I think so. I think, well, in my view is we remain appropriately skeptical. So skepticism is kind of a weighty word, and it really kind of depends on what you mean. I mean, you can consider yourself skeptical, meaning you always have to have things proven to you beyond a shadow of a doubt, and you never really kind of believe in anything, and that's not really giving things a fair handshake, because what you need is, say, adequate evidence. So maybe that's where I land. It's like I'm leaving the door open. I'm not going to necessarily believe anything, but you'd have to show me adequate evidence. Maybe that's where I stand. Maybe it's a personal thing.
I think that's fair.
There's something else to be said on that, which is you'll hear a lot of times, especially maybe on the skeptical side of things, which is this phrase, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And that is, it's just not logically true. So it would be extraordinary if I won the lottery. The chances of me winning the lottery are extraordinary, but I don't need extraordinary proof. I just need an adequate lottery ticket. So extraordinary claims require only adequate evidence, just like anything else requires adequate evidence. So maybe just to throw that out there. I've heard that a few times.
Somebody might say that if there's a miraculous claim that has been made, and I think this goes along with what Charles was saying, if there's a miraculous claim, at some point, I'm about to sound like Spock, you basically have to judge the things that are possible and take out each one when they fail at some level. And when everything else that you thought was possible is no longer possible, you have to believe maybe something that you thought was previously impossible.
But you're leaving at least the door open. See, that's why I think this whole endeavor is actually, it's really truly the most open-minded thing to do. But see, naturalism there, it kind of like cuts off. It's not that we automatically believe in things that are improbable or impossible. What we're saying is, if you show me adequate evidence, I can still go there. See, the naturalism is actually locked down. It said, no matter what you show me, I can't go beyond what's natural. I can't go there. I won't go there. And what the Christian says is, I'm reluctant to go there without adequate evidence. But given adequate evidence, I'm free to keep an open mind and go where the evidence leads, and perhaps go into the supernatural, if evidence so inclines.
No, I think that's exactly what I was kind of trying to get at here. And in drawing in naturalism, I actually think it's limited on both sides to a certain extent, in that there are certain things where we may investigate a little harder because we do believe a supernatural explanation is possible on some very unlikely events, such as, claims of miraculous healings, that sort of thing. While naturalism would essentially chalk that up to a random chance, coincidence. There are going to be so many tumors that just disappear from people, that sort of thing. And then also on the other end, I think there's going to be some limitations, because there are certain events in history that if given a natural explanation, they fall into the realm of the impossible. So it even excludes naturalism from being skeptical of some events that would fall way up here in the impossible range. And by that, I'm referring to mainly two specific events. One is the Big Bang and the creation of the universe as we know it, the improbability of that happening. And the second event, which a lot of scientists have spent time trying to calculate, is abiogenesis, which is the spontaneous creation of life from non-life, which naturalism in pretty much any form would claim that that's something that's occurred on the planet at some point, despite the scientific evidence and computer models show that it would be up here way beyond the 1 in 10 to the 45th power range. So it would be something way up here that would essentially have to be included automatically in a naturalist worldview versus something that you could maintain skepticism about. So I think naturalism actually restricts the view, not just in terms of the explanation, but also in terms of the range of what we can look at and have a skeptical approach to. Anybody out there watching disagree with that? Feel free to say so in chat, or come up here and argue your points.
How about this argument? So, some might say, or maybe mishear what we're saying as, well, then if you can't explain something, you're maybe just inserting supernaturalism there, and this, which would kind of lead to the God of the gaps.
Well, we're going to get to looking at how we should investigate these sort of things next. That's kind of one of our next steps along here is what kind of approach should we take? Right now, we've scoped out definitions. We've looked at how do we define things. And now we're trying to really kind of put it on a scale of looking at this. Which worldview kind of has the most explanatory power? Where would we draw the lines of skepticism? That sort of thing. So we're just kind of looking at scope of the worldview right now. But I think that's a fair objection. And I think it's one that Christians often kind of, in general, shove under the rug. So it's one of those things that, you know, it's either a tool in the tool belt to pull out and say, God did it. And I think sometimes we pull it out way too early when it's something down here. And I think sometimes when it's way up here, maybe we write it off to chance anyway versus saying this is something only God could do. All right. So, for naturalism to be true, every event we see play out in history, cosmology, biology, we require 100% natural explanations. Now, I'm not saying that maybe we have discovered all of those natural explanations yet, but at the end of the day, it requires every single event that takes place to have a naturalistic explanation. There is no room in a purely naturalistic worldview for anything to have a supernatural explanation. For Christianity to be true, we need less than 1% of miracle claims to be true. So it doesn't mean that every miracle claim that comes forth is a true miracle. It doesn't mean that every miracle claim that comes forth only accounts towards Christianity. But it means that for Christianity to be true from a scope perspective, less than 1% of the miracles have to actually occur. One miracle is all it needs for a worldview other than naturalism to be true. So, the question is, which worldview is more likely? Just merely looking at scope now, we're going to look at investigating miracle claims next. But at scope, which worldview is more likely? You guys are going to have biased answers, obviously, but which worldview is more likely from this perspective? Feel free, again, in chat. This is an interactive group as much as possible, so if you disagree, if you have objections, please throw them in chat. Would love to hear. So, Pete, Charles, what do you think Christianity is more likely?
It seems to be the most reasonable worldview based on the evidence. How's that?
I think that's fair.
It's like, so I bet a lot of people are going, what? Where's your faith, sir?
I think my thoughts on God, the naturalism, to if I were going to give naturalism a fair shake, I would say you need to be able to consistently run through nature and see nature being the cause of nature. It's like a gigantic cosmic game of dominoes, or sorry, a string of dominoes. The reason why this domino fell is because this domino fell. And every time you back up, you find a domino. One of the things that we've realized just from our ability to perceive reality is that at some point there was a first domino. Now, just because there was a first domino doesn't mean that the cause of its fall wasn't also natural. But at some point you get to the end of nature. You get to the edge. It's that edge that we're trying to take people to. What do you do at that point? If nature then caused nature, if nature is all that exists, and when you do go back to the Big Bang, right before the snap of everything apart, turning, where did that everything come from? What caused it to become a thing versus no thing? And I mean the full definition of nothing. Where did things come from? Where did space, where did time, where did matter come from? And if it came from nature, well, where did that nature come from? At some point, you get to that first domino. And at that point, you interact with a gigantic unknown. And this isn't necessarily God of the gaps. This is saying, all of nature has pointed to, even the most reputable scientists have said that at one point there was nothing, that we came from some cosmic miracle. Where did things come from? I don't buy the whole quantum mechanic thing of that some matter just popped into existence. And, granted, I may not be skilled enough to explain, hey, matter can't just start to exist without something exerting itself to create that existence. And
Well,
I don't know if I explained that well.
If nature is the result, or matter is the result, well, let's go even broader. If nature is the result, then nature can't be part of the cause. If the result, whatever the result is the creation of nature, then by definition, you can't have nature being part of the cause. So to kind of rebut what you're saying and what Caleb's saying, and just to make it clear to people, this is not a case of Christianity versus science, right? So the Christian worldview totally encompasses the scientific worldview, because the scientific worldview is really, science is a methodology, not a faith system. So it totally encompasses scientific reasoning. But what it says is there's, as Pete was saying, there's an edge, okay? And so scientific views is different than what we would call naturalism. And naturalism is actually a worldview. It's a worldview that says whatever is begins and ends with nature, basically. In other words, there's nothing beyond that. That's a belief that you come into with. And so I guess that's where naturalism and Christianity would end, is they would both accept science. Christianity would say, we'll accept all of science, but we'll add in the possibility for supernatural, maybe more than possibility.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot what one of the things I was trying to get to here with this example is I would largely argue that I think the Christian worldview actually probably looks very similar to this perspective, in that most things we can find a natural explanation for. And I would argue that that should be the first thing we look for an explanation in things for. I wouldn't argue that we look to a miraculous explanation from the start of nearly any claim. I think that we should first look and see what natural explanations make the most sense. And then only once we've kind of exhausted our resources do we kind of look at, okay, well, if God did this, why did he do it? And see if it meets the Christian criteria for a miracle at that point. So I think you both raised very good points with that.
Yeah, if people left, or maybe, I don't want to maybe say this before you're done, but at least this far, if people are going to walk away with one thing, whether you're on the Christian side or the naturalistic side, it's just to understand that Christians, I think, truly informed Christians do not view science as the enemy. Science is not the enemy of Christianity.
Yeah,
that's good for both Christians and non-Christians to hear and know. Christians need not fear science. I think some of them do, and they think, oh, it's the end, and we're, science. It's like, no, we're 100% behind science. We just don't think it necessarily ends there.
Well, I think one of the things you said is people have a wrong view of science. They believe that it is an answer, and in reality, it's just simply a question book.
Yeah, it's a methodology.
Yeah, it's a methodology where you investigate, you ask questions. It's continual. How do I find out new information? And even the information you find out is still in question. It's not like I came up with an answer. How many times has science come up with an answer that then 2, 10, 20 years later, science then rebuts that same answer and comes up with a better answer?
Right, and no one has a problem with that. Christians don't have a problem with that. Certainly naturalists don't have a problem with that. Because when we say science is a methodology, what we're really saying is we believe in the scientific method. And science is a method to learn things about nature. But it ends there. That's a very important thing. Science doesn't disprove faith or supernatural because that's a category mistake. It can't. It actually can't. Science can't disprove supernatural things by definition. Science is the natural methodology for learning things about nature.
Yeah,
to that point, for folks who don't understand what a category mistake would be, people can't scientifically prove that Abraham Lincoln was ever alive. That's not a science. That's
right,
history.
Correct.
So you're going to have to use history.
We're not. By the way, we're not saying that we don't believe Abraham Lincoln didn't exist.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's not science. It's
right.
history. You have to use a totally different methodology to discover and unearth history. A journalistic method or a historiological method. There are folks that are far more skilled at going through history. Now, history and science can overlap. That isn't saying that they don't overlap, but in the same way oil and water can overlap, mixing them gets tenuous right there at the edge. Again, you can do things at the edge where you talk about history and science together, but at some point you then have to say, okay, well, the existence of a person, we're now having to look at and unearth different types of information versus unearthing facts and figures and measurements.
Gosh, you got to.
And Rebecca had a good comment here. She said, on a homeschool field trip to Dixie Caverns, our guide asked if I'm teaching my daughter science or religion. I said both, and he was baffled.
Yeah, see, that's why it's so important. Because my guess is not only that the tour guide at Dixie Caverns would be baffled, but maybe some people in our church would be baffled if you told them that. And it's sad on both sides, I think.
And I think it's something else important for people to realize. Maybe someone's watching this down the road, or maybe someone's come from an entirely different religious background. There are only certain worldviews that will even permit a scientific method to be possible. Naturalism, of course, relies largely on the scientific method, but it still assumes that there is a uniformity and order to nature. Christianity also assumes that there is a uniformity and order to nature, but it relies on that coming from a higher being, God, who created everything. So there is a backing for that higher nature. A worldview such as we'll go with kind of New Thought, New Age teachings, like the metaphysical churches teach, and the Unity Church teaches. Those sort of things. They actually can't rely on a scientific method within their own worldview, because they view reality as a lower plane of existence from true reality, being something far higher and different. So you wouldn't actually be able to rely on science within that kind of worldview in the same way that a Christian relies on it. And a naturalist has the problem of, why is there uniformity and order within reality? So the worldview you're coming at this from also has a big impact on whether the scientific method holds up or has any basis. Daryl's down here in chat under an alias and said that math is God's math. So,
Correct.
Yeah, so that kind of touches on exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so God created the entire universe. He created all of the natural realm. And, I think, during the Enlightenment, what we did was we explored God's creation. And, that's what we were doing.
Right. So now, before we kind of close out on miracles, we're probably going to finish up with this topic tonight. But before we do, it's really important we talk about how we investigate miracles, because I think this is another area that, certainly at a different time in my walk in Christianity, I looked at it very open-ended compared to maybe some of the approach I would take now. So there are a couple different ways we have to look at things, because we have historical miracle claims and we have contemporary miracle claims. So first, to start off looking at historical miracle claims, we don't have any way to go back and observe these. We don't have any way to kind of look through a time machine and see what happened and see whether the miracle claim was valid or not. So we have to rely on records and testimony. That doesn't mean we have to blindly rely on records and testimony, because we can ask, are the sources that we're looking at trustworthy? And how do we determine that? We look at how close they were to the events, whether they are trustworthy sources, whether they added additional things to the claims they're making. Many ancient writers, you can tell when they added miraculous elements to some of the accounts. Many of the accounts of Alexander's life have additional miracle claims thrown in. They were written over 400 years after the events of his life. And so within 400 years, you expect some legends and miracle claims to come into things. And we do have to trust historians a little bit on some of this, since we all can't be a perfect historian. So it's worthwhile to look at what historians have to say about various documents and the reliability of the writers of those documents, those sort of things. And we'll get into a lot of that in the next couple of weeks as we look at the reliability of the Bible. But so that's one way to investigate historical claims, is we check out what we have, who wrote it, are they trustworthy, were they close to the events, what did they write, why did they write it? And then the other thing we have to look at is contemporary miracle claims. These can often be investigated because they're happening in real time in our world now. So, and I think when we investigate these claims, we have to first look at, as we talked about, do they have natural explanations? If they have a good natural explanation, there may be no good reason for us to accept a claim as miraculous. Then another thing worth looking at is, do they support a specific worldview? So when looking at these claims, do they have reasonable support for a particular worldview? Many of the miracle claims we see today that can be verified as much as possible by eyewitness testimony, by direct observation, and some of this comes from Craig Keener did a 2-volume work on miracles where he documented thousands of different contemporary miracle claims and investigated these with firsthand sources. And what he found is that many of these miracle claims, a large majority of the ones we see in this world, can actually be attributed to the Christian God, because many of the miraculous healings and those sort of things we see, not talking televangelist healings and that sort of thing, but many of these accounts occur in third world countries, and they're often in areas where Christianity is just now being presented to native peoples. So groups that have not heard of Christianity before often receive some kind of miracle within their midst that is a confirmation, if you will. And one of the things we talked about last week was that with miracle claims, my definition incorporates that in addition to this, in addition to being miraculous, miracles have to have a message attached to them as well. So in that sense, I think having confirmation in a lot of these cases where Christianity is just being presented to a people, it makes a lot of sense that these would be some of the kind of contemporary miracles we would see, and why we wouldn't see miraculous healings in, your $1 billion church with Benny Hinn and whatever other name you want to throw out there, who's really just using scam artist and magician mentalism, sleight of hand, all that stuff to make it appear as if a miracle has happened. Any thoughts from you guys on investigating miracle claims?
I like it.
Is there anything y'all would add in looking at miracle claims?
There might be a good point to add that someone might say, okay, you're looking in history. Well, some have said, when you're looking at history, you'll never be, miracles are so incredible. This is kind of the Hume argument. Miracles are so incredible that it's always safest to just assume that whatever happened wasn't a miracle. But the problem with that view is that as we look in history and we look at, investigation of whether or not something could have been miraculous, we add in our knowledge of the background, our background knowledge of the event. And so one of the big things, and we did talk about this, and so it kind of fits in very nicely, which is we're not just looking at history and then from history in itself deducing that miracles are possible. So there's a whole field of what's called natural theology, as Pete brought up. We could look at cause of the Big Bang, or we can look at the things like the moral argument or fine tuning, things like that. So we're coming to the table, by the time we get here, we're coming to the table with at least the God is possible. So if God is possible, then miracles are possible. So with that background knowledge, and miracles are, say, fair game with, as we talked about, adequate evidence. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Pausing a little bit to give people time in chat if they have any comments or questions they want to throw at us. Again, this is for interaction. We're not here to lecture people. So, Raquel Johnston, my wife, said that evidence that demands a verdict is a great additional resource for those interested in the proof of Christianity. It does cover a lot of this material in there, and we're particularly going to be covering a lot of stuff from that book in the coming weeks as we look at the Bible, because it largely looks at the Bible, but it also touches on miracle claims and the like as well. So that is a great resource. All right. So, again, we're going to look at things, but there's some stuff we want to keep in mind on the whole subject of miracles. And Charles jumped ahead in his explanation because he touched exactly on this. He must have known where I was going. If God exists, then miracles are possible. The creation of space, time, and matter is a miracle by current standards. And if God created the universe, which is a pretty impressive miracle, the resurrection, physical healings we see today, and even stories in the Bible like the tale of Jonah, are they really unreasonable if we already see evidence of what could conceivably be the greatest miracle possible in the creation of our vast universe from nothing?
That's a pretty big one.
I would say so. We've been studying in school this last year. We've been studying astronomy, and we've spent a lot of time looking at just our solar system. And it's really incredible, just the vastness of our solar system. And then you look at, all the other solar systems and the galaxy we're within and the galaxies that are around us. And it goes on and on. It really is an immense universe. And it's incredible to think that this all came from a single point at some point. All right, so some practical ways we can respond when having this objection. An objection to, say, could be an objection, as I mentioned, to the tale of Jonah in the Bible, which is very miraculous. Could be an objection to the resurrection because it's a miracle. Could be an objection to healing. So it can do any of these things. So what are some practical ways that a Christian could respond to these questions? And if you are questioning miracle claims yourself, then these are some questions I would ask you. So first off, you don't want to assume what someone is saying. So you want to find out what they're actually saying with their questions. We want to understand, to have a conversation, and not to answer things a person's not asking. So what do they mean by miracles? That's why we spent the whole first hour of this discussion looking at definitions, is because by miracles, they may mean something completely different than you think they do. Do you believe miracles are possible? I mean, again, this is an elementary question, but it's very important as to what worldview someone may be coming at a question or an objection from. So, do they believe miracles are possible in their worldview? Why or why not? Do they have examples of miracles? What kind of miracles have they seen or experienced, or claims that they have faced in that area? What bothers them about it? Are the claims they heard, is there something wrong particularly with those claims, or did they reject them for a specific reason? Maybe they came from a household where faith healing was strongly believed, and that prayer for healing was not answered on someone, and they passed away. That's a horrible thing, but that's the kind of scenario that would turn someone off to the possibility of miracles sometimes. Are they talking about contemporary or historical miracles? As we talked about, there's a big difference in terms of how you would investigate each one. How should we assess miracles? Find out how they assess miracles, and then it'll be easier to have a discussion on how you would discuss miracles, or how you would assess miracles. Should we rule out miracles to begin with? So this is David Hume's claim, as we kind of talked about, is if you automatically assume everything has a natural explanation, you're ruling out miracles before you even consider it a possibility. How do they come to that conclusion? If they really do rule out miracles because they believe naturalism is true, then how did they come to the conclusion naturalism was true? And then how many miracles have to be true for Christianity to be true? It's a little bit of a gotcha, but I think it raises a very important point that if one miracle is true, then Christianity is possible. I would say that for Christianity to be true, there have to be at least two miracles that have occurred, and that being the creation of the universe and the resurrection of Jesus. And then, talk about experiences. Have they experienced any miracles or things that they can't explain? It's often a really good discussion when you can talk with somebody about personal experiences they've had and things they've went through, whether they attribute it to a supernatural explanation or whether they've tried to find a naturalistic explanation for that. Again, these are just great questions for having conversations about these kind of objections. So that kind of wraps up with our whole discussion on miracles. Next time we'll be going into why do we trust the Bible. This will probably be a 3 or 4 hour discussion on the topic. Yeah, we've got a lot of ground to cover. So we've got a few minutes left. We've kind of went through this. People are still watching. So what kind of questions do you have that relate to miracles? Are there questions on that, or are there questions you're most interested in seeing answered in the Why We Trust the Bible? Let's see what you're thinking in chat. We've got a quiet group tonight. You have any questions about miracles?
How can God always get them right?
How can God always get them right? So what do you mean by that?
Like, how is he always be able to perform them perfectly?
Okay.
Interesting topic. Is an imperfect miracle? What would that look like?
That is a good question. So, right. So, and I guess in many worldviews, you could anticipate that there would be deities who would perform imperfect miracles. So, the fact that a miracle would be done a specific way could be proof of God in that sense. So, and again, the Christian view of God is that he is outside of time, space, and matter. So he would have complete control over time, space, and matter. Right. So if you had control of time, space, and matter, then a miracle would be you stepping in and impacting that in some way. So it would, from a Christian perspective, a miracle would have to be perfect in the sense or God wouldn't be perfect.
Yeah, because his miracles wouldn't be perfect if there wasn't him.
Right.
Dad,
They're very intricately tied together in the Christian worldview.
I hijacked you.
Okay.
No.
That's okay. What you
No,
got?
I don't know.
Okay. All right. How about you guys? You got any final thoughts or
No, I think
comments?
it sounds like, or it feels to me like you did a really good job of kind of covering the bases there and setting us up for the next thing. I think this topic will lead very well into the next one. Why trust the Bible? There might be some good tie-ins there.
Yeah, and I think that's the next step we have to take, and the next thing we have to look at, because the first question we looked at in terms of objections was about God's existence. So that's one we did live in the coffee shop when we met. So everybody's missed out on that one. We may have to go back and record that one later.
Yeah, trust us. God exists. We already went
Right.
through it. We've already proved it. Just move on.
So, and then, of course, our second objection we looked at was in regards to miracles. And then next week, we'll be starting looking at the claims of the Bible. So, as Raquel noted in chat, the evidence that demands a verdict is one of the resources we'll be relying on heavy as we go through some of that. But we'll also be pulling in a number of other things. So feel free to pick up Evidence That Demands a Verdict, Undesigned Coincidences by Lydia McGrew. Peter Williams has a couple YouTube videos that I've incorporated into some of this. So those are some really good resources you may want to look into. And did you have a resource you wanted to mention?
What's a resource?
Like something like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, like this book
Kinda
is
like
good,
Hot
like to
Chocolate,
prove
Dad.
that God exists, and you
The-
can.
God's Crime
Oh, yeah.
Scene by J. Warner Wallace. So it goes
Right.
into a lot of the evidence for existence
Of
of God.
There is a non-kids version, by the way.
Yep, and it's a good book. We've done it as kind of a companion. As I've went through the adult book, he's went through the kids version, and so it's been really good for some discussions on this topic. So, thanks for joining us
How can I
tonight,
take
guys.
away things?
How can God do everything? Well, that is because he's outside of time, space, and matter.
And you got the 8 if what I that.
Oh, now
What they-
there's an objection we hear a lot. We addressed that a little bit in actually our first one. So this
What
is
was the question? I missed it.
we'll take this objection. So the question was, if God created everything, who created God? You guys want to take that one, or you want me?
Well, I'm still not sure that I think that God can do everything. I believe it or not. So,
All right. So
Nice
I think that
theology there. God
Well-
God can only do His holy will.
yeah, you can't sin, right? You can't
Right.
create square circles. You can't do illogical acts.
If God created everything, who created God? That's the argument that we use frequently, where it's everything that has a beginning has a cause. Everything that has a beginning has a creation, a point of impetus. And then they say, ha ha ha, see, your God doesn't fit into this. So, or it doesn't fit your own definition. No, we never applied that definition to God. God didn't. We don't say God had a beginning. He had no beginning. He's outside of time, space, and matter. He's actually greater than the thing he caused, which is one of our other arguments that we could have said earlier in our discussion, is that the thing that causes something has to be greater than the thing it caused. And in this case, we would say that about God, that God is outside of time, outside of space, and therefore has the ability to create, and does not necessarily need a cause in and of himself. Now we then have to discuss, okay, is it reasonable to assume that God had no cause, no creation? And I believe that at that point, that's a really deep rabbit hole. Is it reasonable to believe that God is an uncaused being?
Yeah, actually it is. But before we go there, I think a lot of times that question is, well, if God created the universe, then who created God? I don't want to say every time, but I think many times that's thrown out there as kind of the gotcha question. It's not really asked in sincerity. It's by people who think they've thought of something that theologians for the last 4,000 years haven't thought of. And well, for one, the Christian understanding of God, before we even go as to why we might think it's true, we could say that from the beginning, our definition, our Christian understanding of God is the uncreated creator. So there isn't any part of Christianity where God is created. He pre-exists all creation. He has always existed. So Christians don't think that God was ever created. And non-Christians don't think he was created either, because they don't think he exists. So no one really in this discussion thinks that God was ever created. Christians don't think he was created. Non-Christians don't think he was created. So it's really kind of a non-starter as a question. It's meant as a gotcha. Now, why do we think necessarily that God is the uncreated creator? And well, that goes to kind of what Pete was leading towards, which is if you look at the beginning of the cosmos, and this is a really fascinating, definitely don't have time to flesh this out, but just in a small capsule, part of the scientific understanding of the Big Bang is that when the Big Bang occurred, time begins to exist, which is a really weird concept, but that is the best understanding of the Big Bang. One of the things that was created was not only time, matter, three-dimensional space, all these things were created. So necessarily, as we talked about before, if the cause or the effect can't be part of the cause by definition, then whatever created time must be timeless. It's like by definition, has to be. So whatever created the time-full universe must itself necessarily be timeless, spaceless, immaterial, incredibly powerful, personal agent. So we can get there. Scientifically, we can get there. Logically. And we can also get there as Christians.
Yeah, and the law of causality really doesn't hold up without time, because everything would be stagnant without time. So for the law of causality to even be in play, of everything that's created having a cause, then you necessarily have to have time in play at that point, because before that, which is, you've pointed out before, is kind of a useless term to use to describe it, because there was no before that. Without time, there's no reason to think that the law of causality would still hold.
Yeah,
That's
some really interesting properties there.
That's one of the interesting rebuttals that I've heard people say about their refutation, is that in order for there to be a God, there has to be a before time existed.
That's incorrect.
And again,
first of all, you can't say there's before time, but without time, you would say without time, but I understand what they mean.
Sure, and so it's that exact mistake, is that somehow we are saying time had to exist so that there was a time, quote unquote, before time existed. And very much like what you were saying, is the refutation that I've heard. It's a little bit more difficult to put words around, because you find yourself playing this kind of word chess with the other person when somebody says, ha ha ha, you said the word before, therefore you acknowledge my premise. And no, in reality, what we mean is that time, without time existing,
Yeah.
God was still self-existent.
Yes.
Then there's also the other part, which is, and I've heard this, that, and I think I brought this up, months ago, where somebody said, which is greater, God or reality? So if God is greater, then he's outside of reality, therefore he doesn't exist. Or if reality is greater, then therefore your God is not great, and there is something greater than your God. And that's a false dichotomy, when in reality, we can look at Scripture and say, God even says that it is by him all things have their being. In him we live and breathe and have our being. That God, in fact, is reality.
That's correct. Yes.
Lots
Is
of
the
fun
fullest,
with it.
truest definition of reality, and what springs from him is therefore a reflection of or an extension of his true reality.
Yeah.
Same
All
with
right.
morality, by the way. All right, but
Well,
we
that's
digress.
we've digressed a good bit, but I think it's been a good one. So we're still trying to honor people's time for spending the last hour with us. We appreciate that, and appreciate everybody in chat who joined us. Please come back again. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We'll be looking at why do we trust the Bible, and so bring your questions, bring your objections. It'll be a great discussion. We look forward to it. So thanks so much for joining us, and God bless.
Thanks, Caleb.
Thanks, Caleb.